Welcome to another DirectionsMag podcast, co-hosted with our friends at URISA.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Xan Fredericks, one of the past chairs of URISA's Professional Education Committee. I work for the U.S. Geological Survey's National Geospatial Program, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Cindy Thatcher and Josh Nimetz, to talk about what's new and now in the realm of remote sensing, specifically Lidar. If you're unfamiliar with Lidar, it's an active remote sensing technique similar to sonar or radar, but instead of using sound waves or radio waves, Lidar uses pulses of light to map the target. Now, I love talking about Lidar, so thanks, Josh and Cindy, for joining me today. And to get us started, I wondered if you'd each share a bit of your backgrounds. We'll start with you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Xan. So presently, I'm with the USGS, National Geospatial Technical Operations Center, as the Senior Elevation Project Lead. And the way I describe that position to others is it's kind of a technical program management role for 3DEP with the NG talk. Prior to joining the USGS in early 2017, I worked for a few different geospatial firms in the private sector, largely focused on aerial remote sensing and data production, as well as supporting field surveying done in support of those aerial remote sensing projects. So my background is primarily in operations, spent a lot of time working with various Lidar sensors in the private sector. And now that I'm involved on the federal side, working with 3DEP, I'm involved in helping our operations staff at NG Talk look at the Lidar data, understand some of the variability that we see in the data sets, and help to resolve some of the problems that we have in our specifications, where we see discrepancies between, let's say, what our current practice is with respect to Lidar data sets versus what we may have written in our specifications. There's always a need to reconcile those differences over time. And so I do a lot of things presently, but I'm now on the other side of it with USGS, looking at the data, making sure the data is suitable for 3DEP, and also have the opportunity to remain engaged with the private sector as one of the folks that gets to work closely with our contractors who are doing the data acquisition and production. So that's a little bit about my background, and I'll hand it off to Cindy.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and thanks for having us here today. So I'm a geographer working for USGS, and I'm part of the 3D elevation program team, or 3DEP. And my job is to help manage the team and develop our annual work plans. And I also focus some on topobathymetric LiDAR for inland water bodies, especially rivers. And as part of that, I try to keep an eye on advances in topobathymetric mapping, help figure out which rivers we're going to map each year, and then work with our team to make sure the data is published and easily accessible, and then coordinate also with other federal agencies who are also working on collecting bathymetry data.
That's some great expertise between both of you. Between the advances being made, you keeping an eye on that, and then Josh, you mentioned data suitability, and we've been hearing a lot about accuracy lately, and with it being so crucial for so many applications, I wonder how has the accuracy of Lidar, both topo and topobathymetric, improved in recent years, and what factors do you think have contributed to that improvement?
You know, I would have to say, first and foremost, the people in the greater geospatial community. There's an ever-growing awareness of both the strengths and weaknesses of Lidar, and more we are seeing the Lidar data users who scrutinize the data being more informed and better trained. And through a variety of different feedback loops the LiDAR data user experience makes its way back to the LiDAR data acquisition and production companies, and subsequently back to the sensor manufacturers and software companies. And with 3DEP, USGS plays an important role in acting as the hub of that communication. A lot of times we see or we hear back from our stakeholders in 3DEP and our users who provide feedback through, say, the National Map Help Desk, identifying something that may be particularly concerning to them in the data, and then they let us know, and that raises our awareness of it, and we in turn have a conversation with the data producer who in some cases, if there's an actual sensor related issue, may relay that back to their sensor manufacturers. So there's better communication and overall better awareness of what the data is and isn't. So I just want to start off with that. I think that the vast majority of the folks working with LiDAR data today are so much better informed and educated than they were, say, 10 years ago. And so from there, we have that flow of information going from the data user all the way back to the sensor and software companies. On the technical side, I'd say it has to start with the GNSS inertial systems that provide the direct georeferencing of the point cloud, and modern survey grade GNSS instrumentation is multi-constellation GNSS enabled versus 20 some odd years ago when commercial LiDAR arena was in the early stages in the United States, where everybody was reliant on GPS enabled positioning alone. Now we have GPS, we have the Chinese Beidou, the European Galileo, and the Russian GLONASS constellations providing simultaneous signals, and the receiver, the GNSS receiver technology is able to interpret and corroborate those signals, and really it's resulting in better positioning overall, with faster convergence times, so the ability to resolve a true position or an accurate position in a shorter time frame. On board the aircraft, the inertial subsystem, which is made up of the GNSS receiver, the inertial measurement unit, and onboard firmware, is employing real-time Kalman filtering, and I think that the manufacturers of that hardware and software are improving the algorithms to help mitigate some characteristics or limitations of the hardware, such as IMU drift. I think we're seeing some improvements there. And on the software side, once the trajectory data has been collected, we're seeing better tightly coupled solutions. So the trajectory, the accuracy of the trajectory in a post-processing environment is improving all the while with improvements in algorithms as well. Then there's also different GNSS observation modalities, such as real-time precise point positioning, or PPP, where we're hearing from some of our contractors who work on 3DEP are no longer finding it necessary to establish static reference stations or base stations on the ground. They can fly independent of base stations on the ground and collect very, very good quality trajectory information by employing this real-time PPP information. So the positioning is getting better. what we're seeing on the LiDAR sensor side in general is that the ranging precision has come down to anywhere from 1 to 3 centimeters for large format LiDAR sensors. So assuming you have a properly calibrated sensor model, if you're looking at a set of scan data on man-made surface, such as a parking lot or a road, anywhere across the LiDAR scan, we're seeing vertical variability from return to return on the order of 1 to 3 centimeters, which is very good. And I think that's pretty consistent across all of the various LiDAR technologies out there. So we're seeing, just to recap briefly, better positioning and better ranging precision. And then on the post-processing side, we've seen this. There are software packages that are intended to help resolve minor geometric issues in the data, as far as let's say a swath to swath alignment check goes. There may still be residual errors in the point cloud stemming from the trajectory solution, and the modern software used to resolve some of those issues doing a really, really good job of identifying conjugate features and areas of overlapping swath data, and identifying the different angular or linear corrections that are needed to align those swaths. And the results of that geometric correction process are generally pretty good. And so we're seeing that even with residual error in the point cloud affecting the data internal precision, this software is able to resolve a lot of those issues. So that's a lot. I rambled a bit there, but it's a combination of proper communication making its way to the entities that need to be aware of issues in the technology, and them working to make sure their customers are happy by resolving those issues on the sensor side or on the software side. Better positioning technology and better post-processing solutions as well, and all of that's making for high quality airborne LiDAR data.
I mean, those are some exciting advances, especially with your background having, been around and seeing it from different perspectives. You talked about increased efficiencies, which was an aspect I hadn't really considered. I've been thinking about it more from a finer data accuracy standpoint rather than that faster measurement. That's a really, really good point. You also mentioned, how did you say it? What the data is or isn't. And I think that's really important. What are you trying to map at what scale? I'm guessing that's a really important question in inland bathies. Cindy, when you work with topobathymetric LiDAR, what kind of considerations need to be made when it comes to accuracy, and how do those expectations differ from topo LiDAR?
Yeah, so in general, topobathy LiDAR is a lot more complex. We've been doing some pilot surveys over the past several years to acquire topobathymetric LiDAR through commercial mapping companies. And we're trying to better understand how the environmental conditions affect the success of the surveys, and also just gaining more experience with doing the data validation process. And we've tested surveys with different sensors and different environmental conditions to better understand where the technology performs well and where it doesn't. And some factors to consider are water clarity, water depth, the type and the brightness of the bottom substrate, the river or whatever the water body is. And then things like air bubbles in the water column where there might be rapids. submerged aquatic vegetation and the presence of algae in the water column. All those things can affect the ability of the laser to detect the bottom, and so it makes conducting these surveys a lot more challenging, I think, than doing a topo survey. So we're looking at the LiDAR data to see how it performs in terms of vertical accuracy, depth penetration, and point density. And I think one challenge with working with topobathy LiDAR is that for many water bodies, it's just not enough. It doesn't give you complete coverage of the entire submerged bottom surface usually, unless the conditions are really good. So you often end up with voids or no data in deep areas or places where the water just isn't clear enough for whatever reason. And so kind of the way to get around that issue, the best way really is to fill those voids using another technology such as sonar. So yeah, it's a lot more complex than just doing a topo survey.
It sure sounds like it. And I imagine too, when you're, going for inland bathy, you said specifically rivers were something that you focus on with that. The changes in turbidity, I've got to think are almost constant, let alone, what seasonality or even, if it was right after a large rain event or something like that. So there are a lot of variables that you're working with there. My goodness. Josh, you talked earlier a little bit about the different satellites and the different equipment that was providing an opportunity for higher accuracy. What are some notable software tools, or are there any data processing techniques that are being used to effectively analyze and assess the LiDAR data now that we've got this ability for higher accuracy?
Yeah, there are a variety of different software packages available to data producers and data users. Many of these have been in use within industry for a long time now. There aren't any major new software packages out there for the typical data producer, data user that come to mind. There are newer software as a service options out there for cloud-based feature extraction. Although I don't personally have any experience with those, I know that certain industries are capitalizing on those software as a service options. But anyways, getting back to the question about analyzing and visualizing the LiDAR data, I would say that what we're seeing is an uptick in point cloud densities. And so the fidelity of the data is increasing, and that is enabling that geometric correction process that I mentioned in my last response. And so we're seeing the software that's designed to improve the quality of the data is maybe more successful because of increased point cloud densities, where previously with coarser point cloud data sets, it might have been more difficult for that software to resolve features in overlapping areas or common features in overlapping areas. Now we have higher densities, and that actually improves the geometric correction of the data. So getting back to the geometric quality of the data, which of course is so important. We want to start with good positional accuracy before we do anything else with the data. So I'll start there. And then as far as analyzing and visualizing the data, we're seeing different techniques for how to load large point cloud data sets into a compute environment. Some software packages are very RAM dependent, and so the point cloud is loaded into memory. And so as long as you have enough memory, you can load large amounts of data and work within very rapid fashion. And I think some of the key production software packages being used by the data providers work that way. We're also seeing more and more spatial indexing employed. So whether that's a quad tree or octree spatial indexing, that's being used either as an internal component of the point cloud file. So most of us are working with LAS or LAZ file formats for aerial LiDAR, and these software packages can embed the spatial indexing information in the VLRs or the EVLRs within the LAS file for rapid viewing and also for rapid processing. Other software packages may write a sidecar file for spatial indexing, but those are techniques. Those are two techniques. Either the RAM or the spatial indexing option to both render and process the point cloud quickly. As far as analyzing the data, this may sound this may come across as being kind of odd, but we find at USGS that many times the best way to get a good holistic look at the point cloud is to actually create derivative rasters. So we actually rasterize the data and we look for different characteristics of the data by looking at the raster data sets and not at the point cloud, such as the data internal precision or the inner swath goodness of fit, or we look for noise that may be not properly isolated in the point cloud. We look at different raster data sets to identify those. Those are two examples of potential issues in a point cloud data. But if you're looking on a local level, so if you're looking at a specific small geographic extent of the point cloud, it's always best to look at the point cloud. There's no substitute for that, and we do that simply by cross-sectioning and rendering cross-section or profile of the point cloud, and looking at either combinations of point classification or return information. There's so many different ways to visualize the different characteristics of the point cloud in any number of software packages out there. And so for project level viewing, we really want to look at the raster derivatives to identify patterns in the data. For local, a local street level view, if you will, of the data, we want to look at the point cloud. So the raster derivatives are used as a guide to help kind of hone in where it is we need to check the data, and then we look at the data. And honestly, I wouldn't want to call out any particular software. There are multiple software packages out there that we actually use several at USGS because there is no perfect software package out there. But it's a combination of looking at raster derivatives and looking at the point cloud. And I think that's pretty much the way it's been done for a long time now. And hopefully I touched on those questions in a good way, Xan. Do you have any other follow-up questions or?
No, I thought that was perfect. I especially appreciated you saying there is no perfect software package. It's just what Cindy alluded to earlier, just like LiDAR is not the panacea, right? You sometimes need to couple it with sonar. You need complementary things instead of just trying to rely on one, because that will always introduce bias. So I thought that was really well said. Also, I 100% agree. I think you're totally right when it comes to creating a raster to visualize your point cloud just differently. I'll never forget working on an inland river in the Northeast US, and the point cloud looked fantastic, but as soon as you created that raster, it looked awful. So I would never have thought that that's how it would have rendered. And yet that then gave us, the impetus to go back to the point cloud and really dig in and identify what was happening. So I love that you guys are still creating rasters just to give you a different perspective. And then two, you mentioned the increased density, but along with that spatial indexing in RAM, because I imagine one without the other wouldn't work. Well, I guess the spatial indexing would still work on low density things, but with that increased density, I can't imagine not having the spatial indexing in order to help that visualization. So I really appreciate your thoughts on those.
Yeah.
You also mentioned areas. Go ahead.
Xan, could I just add one point that I think is pertinent? Something else I wanted to bring up with the multiple software packages is that we find that not all software interprets the data the same way. And sometimes we find the need to use one software package to troubleshoot an issue in the data that actually may not be an issue with the data. It may be an issue with the way another software package is interpreting the data. So if we're responding to a user's concern or a partner's concern, and I'm speaking as a member of 3DEP now, we find it often helpful to pull data into different software packages because the data may behave differently, or what may register as an error in one software package is not in another. And so then it helps us hone in on the true cause of the problem. Is it problematic data or problematic file formatting, or is it actually potentially an issue with the software? So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, though. It's kind of like if individuals, if you give them the same data set and they're going to perform a visual QA/QC on it, we may have all taken the same QA/QC course teaching us how to do it, but I guarantee we'll each identify different things in the data. Some of them will be the same, but I have a feeling we're all looking at it a little bit differently because our visual acuity is different, how we mentally process what we're looking at. So it makes perfect sense that the softwares would behave similarly. So that's a really good point to make.
Yeah, excellent point as well.
And so you did mention areas of overlap. We're talking about increased density, and my brain was thinking, or areas of overlap have the potential for even more increased density. And then Cindy, you talked about integrating Lidar with other kinds of data. In my mind, I'm thinking sonar, for example. So those areas of overlap would be more dense. How does the integration of bathymetric data with topographic data contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of landscapes, both above and below the water?
Yeah, a lot of science applications need continuous data across the land and into the depths of the water bodies. And I think the best example is models of the flow of water across the landscape, such as storm surge models and any type of flood model. And because of that, we're really seeing a growing interest in bathy Lidar for inland applications. I mean, it's already huge for coastal, of course, but for inland areas, we're seeing a lot of interest related to flood modeling and other topics. Like, for example, we know that NOAA is making some really significant investments in acquiring topobathy Lidar data for rivers. And they're specifically doing that to help improve their flood models. And they're seeing that having bathymetry data really helps improve the accuracy of flood predictions. Where they don't have bathy data in flood models, what they do is either leave out the river channel morphology, or they just estimate that from the surrounding landscape. They estimate the shape and the depth of the channel. But obviously, it's much better to have real bathymetry data. Another key application we're seeing is related to fish habitat restoration, especially for salmon on the West Coast where it's listed as an endangered species. Some other examples are mapping rivers pre and post dam removal. There's some pretty big dam removal projects happening in the United States, or they're planned, and we really need to better understand how the river is going to change when all that sediment that's stored behind the dam is released. I think another interesting recent example is the Potomac River Survey. In that one, our funding partner is using the data for modeling toxic spills that could affect the drinking water intakes for the DC area. And the data integration part is interesting. So ideally, if you're using a topographic Lidar system, it's using a green laser that can penetrate the water. And that's different from a topo system where the red laser is usually absorbed at the water surface. And so, a lot of newer topobathy sensors have a depth penetration of sometimes up to 30 meters or even beyond if the conditions are perfect and the water is really clear. But at the same time, most of these systems can also map the surrounding topography of the land areas at the same time. And so this is really helpful for mapping shorelines and for ensuring that the digital elevation models are a continuous elevation surface that transitions really cleanly between the dry ground and the submerged topography. So that's a really huge advantage of the technology. I think another advantage of LiDAR in aquatic environments is safety. So if you're doing boat-based sonar surveys, it works great until you start getting into really shallow water. And then you're worried about, the danger factor for boats operating close to the shoreline or in rocky, shallow water. And it just so happens that is the environment where LiDAR technology works best, that shallow near-shore environment. But yeah, just in general, it's a great technology that gives you a nice integrated water and land elevation. So I think I'll stop there.
You make a really good point about that narrow swath width with the sonar, in shallower depths, because not only from a safety standpoint, but I've got to think from a resource standpoint, the amount of boat time, those track lines would have to be so close together in order to get complete coverage, that I've got to think that lots of people are very grateful for the LiDAR technology when it comes to, budgets by themselves.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, sonar gets so inefficient in shallow water.
And yet it blows LiDAR out of the water, right? No pun intended. Well, maybe a little intended. But when it comes to really deep, that makes perfect sense, that the marrying of those two technologies, there's a time and place for it. It's kind of like, Josh, almost what you were saying earlier, like what can the data do and what it can't, right? What can this sensor do and what it can't? So it's a good example of how these evolvements, how these innovations in the technology in the sensor realm are really helping increase the densities of data as well as increase the efficiencies on how we can collect the data. And having those integrated data sets sounds like it is. You mentioned improving accuracy of flood predictions or the Potomac River Survey. Those have huge implications for people, and I think it's wonderful that we're getting these data out there for them. Josh, how does the accuracy assessment differ for integrated data sets? Does it, or do they use different standards and specifications?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Xan. I think it ultimately depends on the the primary user of the data and what their requirements are. We've been involved in conversations where user may choose to prioritize one data set over another, independent of any absolute positional accuracy checks that have been done. So what I mean by that is you may have one data set that checks well to an independent control network, and that is how we check the vertical accuracy of airborne LiDAR, right? We use checkpoints. But sometimes a user may want to deprioritize the checkpoints and prioritize a surface established from the other data set that's being integrated. And so you bring these two data sets together so that there's goodness of fit between them. You kind of disregard the positional accuracy of one data set from the checkpoints. So it really depends on users' priorities. I would say for integrating topographic and bathymetric data, that best practice is to control that process by holding the topo LiDAR constant and moving the bathymetric data to it, because we know the bathymetric data, whether it's from LiDAR or collected from acoustic technologies, is going to have more error. So it depends. We've seen integration of, let's say, airborne and mobile based LiDAR data, and I've heard of different scenarios where the mobile LiDAR is moved to the aerial LiDAR and vice versa. And so when you are moving one data set to another, something's going to be compromised. Typically, it's not. I should say it's not typical for both data sets to be tied perfectly well to the same control network. So you may have to compromise positional accuracy of one to make it match the other.
Sure. I can only imagine the variables that need to be considered, right? Especially imagine if they're not even collected at the same time. Right there, it starts to deviate in my mind. So that's a really good point. And so, Cindy, we were just talking about accuracy assessments for integrated data sets, but I wondered, are there other considerations when using LiDAR, whether topo or topobathy, that need to be made?
Yeah, I guess let's talk about from the topobathy LiDAR perspective. One issue is that LiDAR systems are designed and flown to meet eye safety standards. And normally the laser is not detectable on the ground, except maybe at night if you're really watching for it. So from that point of view, there's a limitation on how powerful the laser can be in order to ensure eye safety. But there's really no impact on people or the environment in terms of using this technology. And most people wouldn't be aware that the survey is even happening because the plane is, a couple thousand feet above ground level minimum. So no, I don't really think there's any major considerations other than that eye safety factor.
That makes perfect sense. Josh, what are some resources or organizations, if people want to learn more, where can they turn to for further learning or to stay up to date with the latest standards or specifications or developments in the field?
Oh yeah, there's more and more resources out there. It's so great to see our industry as a whole is growing. There's far more interest in geospatial these days, and it's trending in the right direction as I think more and more communities of practice are realizing the benefits of geospatial data and how geospatial data can help them. So We're seeing continuance of organizations like URISA and ASPRS. Certainly looking at publications like Directions Magazine and Lidar Magazine and other widely available publications that are either free or at a low cost are great sources of information for new technology and case studies. And the other thing is, of course, conferences. There are multiple geospatial conferences throughout the country over the course of the year. And I would say when and where possible, it is always really good for folks to attend those, not only to hear from the presenters, but to network and to have conversations with peers and others who are working with the data to learn about their successes and their trials with the data. Really, the more people can expand their network and learn from others who are working with geospatial data, the better everyone will be. I've learned so much in my career just from talking to people. That is my number one recommendation. And now many of the conferences that may have in the past been attainable only in person are available with virtual options as well. It makes it a little bit easier for folks to participate. So when and where possible, please make it a point to expand your network and reach out to people on LinkedIn and attend those conferences, and of course read those publications and just stay engaged. There are national and regional organizations that are doing really good work in regards to geospatial data knowledge.
I love that encouragement. I agree. It all comes back in my mind to the people. We're mapping what we map in order to make assessments to help people. And also, to your point, I can't think of a better way of staying up to date with the innovations, right? What's new and now is staying in tune with that network and making a network we can all learn from each other. And I think that's a great way of going forward. And it's so nice to have someone that you can reach out to when you're stymied, right? You see something in the data you've never seen before. It's really nice that there are other people out there that may have had a similar experience. So to wrap things up, I wonder what each of you find most exciting about the new and now developments, if you will, in remote sensing, specifically in the context of LiDAR. Cindy, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think just in general, the improvements in LiDAR sensors and data processing techniques over the past several years have just been amazing. We're seeing on the bathy side, we're seeing more powerful sensors that can penetrate to deeper depths and able to work in water that's not all that clear, which is really helpful. Or seeing higher density data, which is super useful for our user community that really needs a lot of detail to do their analyses. And we're also seeing that the vertical and horizontal accuracy of all types of LiDAR data is really becoming very good, easily exceeding our requirements most of the time. And I guess Josh just was mentioning conferences, and last week Josh and I were both at the JOBLTEX conference, which stands for Joint Airborne LiDAR Bathymetry Technical Center of Expertise. We were at that workshop, and we saw some really interesting work happening in the mapping world, and focusing on bathymetry in particular. There was some really exciting research on satellite-derived bathymetry and the use of the ICE-SAT2 data for validating or calibrating bathymetry data, and just all kinds of new science and management applications for the data that were really inspiring to see. So
I love that in the sense that it shows how these sensors can be complementary instead of competing technologies. And I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it to move forward. Again, this integration will certainly help everyone out there. So Josh, what about you? What do you find most exciting about the new and now developments going on?
Yeah, I'd have to echo a lot of what Cindy just said. I'd say first and foremost, the quality of the data. There's just a better awareness of LiDAR data quality, and again, that communication has been happening for years between the data users and the data producers and the manufacturers of the hardware and the software, and all of that has led to an improvement in quality. And with that improved quality, people are able to rely on the data more. We're seeing definite increases in fidelity of data, so increased point cloud densities and better modeling and feature extraction coming from that, and along with that increased fidelity, we're seeing more focus on three-dimensional positional accuracy. We've always tested the vertical accuracy of LiDAR data with checkpoints, but there's more and more discussion now about how do we know how well this point cloud ties to a real world reference system in 3D space, and we can do that with increased point cloud density. So that increased positional accuracy enables the engineering and the engineering disciplines to rely on the data more than perhaps they otherwise would. And I did want to also just touch on that idea of data corroboration. So Cindy mentioned the Atlas laser on the ISAT-2 spaceborne system, and we have these different collection modalities, whether it's ground-based or aerial-based or spaceborne, and over time, it's going to be to everyone's advantage to have different elevation data or different geospatial data collected from remote sensing that can be used to evaluate the quality of the data. So having that multi-temporal, multi-modality concept really enables data verification, and again, that will help us to rely on the data more. If we have two different elevation data sets collected over time from different platforms that generally agree well with each other, we can a user will have more confidence in working with either of those two data sets. Likewise, where we see changes due to engineering or natural landscape changes, having different data sets would be very useful for change detection. So I think the next phase of 3DEP is going to be focused on that. Where are we seeing change, and how can we use multi-temporal LiDAR data sets to evaluate that change?
That's so important, especially as we move forward with, like you were saying, with the new modalities, as well as the new minds that are joining our field every day, new people coming in, whether they're students or just early career professionals. I'm intrigued how the current technology will serve as a springboard, right? I'm excited to see what's developed in the future. So Cindy and Josh, thank you so much for such an enlightening conversation about what's new and now in the realm of LiDAR.